We live in a world where there are too many programming languages out there, so many databases to choose from, and seemingly infinite ways to host your application. When you could be coming up with bright ideas and bettering your user experience, you're forced to think about things like security vulnerabilities, networking, and availability. And that's where Firebase comes in, a backend as a service that provides a suite of tools with little to no backend code. Need authentication? Log in with Facebook, GitHub, Google, email password, or even anonymously. Need a database? You have two options, real-time database and firestore. Or maybe you need to store a bunch of 4K videos. Firebase storage is great for that. But where can I host my website? Use Firebase hosting. Or maybe you need to send out a bunch of email notifications or perform transactions. Use Firebase's serverless cloud functions. And that's not to mention tools such as AppCheck for fraud detection, analytics, and machine learning, as well as extensions to install third-party services into your Firebase project with a step-by-step guide showing you how to do so. Now, everything good I am saying about Firebase is purely my opinion, and I definitely do have evidence to support my claims, but this video is not sponsored by Firebase or Google, and proof of that is check my subscribers. I only have 290 of them. In this beginner-friendly tutorial, you will learn the fundamentals of Firebase by building a real-time to-do application with Google Authentication and host it to the cloud to show it off to your friends and family. To get started, you'll need three things: a basic understanding of JavaScript, Node.js installed on your machine, and a Google account. I hope you have one of those. Now, if all that sounds interesting to you, please make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, and let's get started with Firebase. Now, I'll start off by logging into my Firebase console, and what you want to do is create a new project. Now, once you give your Firebase project a name, you'll be taken to the next page for analytics, and I'm just going to disable it and create my project. This process can take a few moments, so I'm just going to take a coffee break. Refreshing. Sleep early, kids. Now, once it's done, you'll select continue, and it will show you a few options that you can build your application with. You can build it for Android, iOS, or the web, even Unity and Flutter. What we want to do is build it for the web. Now it's just going to prompt me to give my application a name. And one thing to note is that a Firebase project can have multiple applications. So I'm just going to leave hosting checked off for now, and I'll get instructions on how to set up my Firebase application. So I'm just going to go into VS Code, and I'm going to run npm init vite followed by the name of the application. Now, if you are unaware of what vite is, it is a model bundler just like Webpack is, only it requires little to no configuration to set up. Now, the reason why we need a model bundler like vite is because Firebase is modular and it requires us to install it from npm. So I'll get a few options on how to set up my application, and I'm just going to choose vanilla for vanilla JavaScript. And once it's done, I'm just going to cd into my project directory and run npm install to install Vite's dependencies. Next, I'm going to run npm install Firebase, and inside of my browser, I'm just going to go ahead and copy this code snippet. And inside of my text editor, I'm going to go to my main.js file, delete the code that's been set up by Vite, and paste in my Firebase credentials. Now, these API keys are used to identify your Firebase project, and it is meant to be exposed in the front end, so you don't have to worry about hiding them. So I'm just going to log out to the console, this app constant, and from my terminal, I'm going to run npm run dev. Now, if I open up my browser on localhost 3000 and take a look into my console, I should have my Firebase app printed out to the screen. Now, all this code is cluttering up my main JavaScript file, and I didn't even begin to start writing my Firebase code. So I'm just going to cut the code that initializes my Firebase project, and I'm going to create a new file in my project folder and call it Firebase config. And inside of my Firebase config file, I'm just going to export the app constant that initializes my Firebase project. Now, inside of my main.js file, all I'm going to do is import the app constant as Firebase, and I'm going to change this from app to Firebase. Now, inside of my browser, it should work exactly the same. Now, let's shift gears for a moment, and I'm going to start placing the boilerplate for my HTML file so that we can start building the application. So I'm just going to delete the basic boilerplate and paste in code of my own. Now, this is not a HTML tutorial, so I'm just going to walk through the code that I have set up. And keep in mind, all this code can be found on my GitHub page, link in the description below. Now if we take a look at the code inside of the HTML file, we first have a div tag with an ID of app, and that has a nav tag inside of it with two buttons, one for signing in with Google and the other for login out. Next I have a form tag that contains an input of type text and a h3 tag where I will display an error instructing the user to sign in if they want to add a to-do. Then I have the section tag, and as you can see it is empty, but this section tag is where we are going to be placing all the to-dos. Next, I'm just going to navigate to my CSS file, and I'm just going to delete all the code that Vite provided and paste in styles of my own. Now, I'm not going to walk through these styles as it is irrelevant to learning Firebase, but you can go ahead and copy it from my GitHub page or amend it if you like. So I'm just going to save the file and close it. And as for a final touch, I'm just going to go ahead and paste in my Google logo into my Firebase project, and once everything is saved and navigate to my web browser, I should get a page like this one that has the Google sign-in button and the form but no to-dos. Now it is officially time to get into the good stuff, so I'm just going to navigate to my Firebase project, and the first thing I will land on is my project dashboard. But what we need to focus on as developers is this build section right over here. If I want to add authentication to my project, all I'll have to do is navigate to the authentication section. We would click this button to get started and follow the instructions from there. We also have the firestore database and the real-time database, and also storage and hosting as we mentioned in the beginning of this video. Of course, once we've completed building our application, we would want to go and navigate to the release and monitor section where we can check performance on our application if any crashes occur, along with many other features. We also have the analytics, and in this section you will analyze your application. For example, you could see there is events and audiences so that you might get a better understanding on who to market your project to and maybe even why they use it. Now obviously all these features are beyond the scope of this video, but one thing I want to show you is that it says here Sparks and no cost, and that is because we are on the Sparks plan and we can easily upgrade to the pay-as-you-go plan. Now one thing I find great about Firebase is that it does not ask you for credit card or debit card information once you sign up, it just works. Now obviously once you've met a certain threshold, then you will be upgraded from the Sparks plan to the Blaze plan, which is also the pay-as-you-go plan. But obviously you can't automatically get upgraded if you don't provide any debit card information. Now if you would like to take a look at the Firebase pricing, all you have to do is search on Google for Firebase pricing, and there you can compare and contrast the differences between the free tier and the pay-as-you-go plan. Now I'm just going to go back to my Firebase dashboard and close off this billing panel and navigate towards authentication. From there, I'm going to get started, and here I'll have multiple options on how I want to allow my users to sign in to my application. So I'm just going to select Google and enable it so that I can allow my users to sign in with Google. Next is going to ask me for a project support email, and you can select the one that you're currently using for your Firebase account. Then I'll just hit save, and now I have Google authentication enabled on my Firebase project. So now if I just go ahead and navigate to VS Code, we're going to start writing our very first lines of code in Firebase, and we'll start off with the authentication part of this project. So I'm going to start off by deleting the console.log Firebase and import getAuth from Firebase/auth. This Firebase/auth comes from our npm package that we've installed earlier. Now if you are a new starter to Firebase, which I'm assuming you are, the reason why this video is titled Firebase version 9 and not just Firebase is due to the fact that Firebase version 9 is very different from its predecessors. Now the main difference between version 8 and version 9, and the reason why you would have to know this, is because if you went and searched on Google because you ran into some kind of problem with Firebase, you might find code that is very different to what you are typing in. So I'm just going to go ahead and take a look at the Firebase documentation, which is great documentation by the way, and you can see that we have version 8 and version 9. So if we take a look at how Firebase tells us how to use Firebase in version 8, you can see we have a Firebase object that was imported, and on the Firebase object we have an auth method, and on this auth method we have a sign in with pop-up method. And the issue when it comes to writing code like this is that say we want to use Firebase only for Google authentication. Well, if we import Firebase and use auth, it is going to bring everything that is on the auth method, including sign in with Facebook, sign in with Google. It's just going to bring everything. So Firebase version 9 addresses this. So instead of importing Firebase, we import getAuth, and getAuth is a function that will use sign in with pop-up and the Google Auth provider to do the exact same thing. So now over in VS Code, I'm going to import all the required functions so that we could use Firebase authentication with Google. So I'm going to import Google Auth provider, as we will need that to sign in with Google. Now once we sign in, it should display to us a pop-up, so we will also need sign in with pop-up. Now this is all we need in order to sign in with Google, but we also need to sign out. So therefore, I'm also going to import sign out. Now one last thing we need to check is whether a user is signed in or signed out. So there is a separate function that comes with Firebase, and that is onAuth state changed. Now in order to sign in with Google, Firebase makes that very simple. So the first thing I'll need to do is create a constant called auth and set that equal to getAuth, and that takes in one argument, and that is the Firebase object that we've created, which contains the credentials for our project. Next, I'm going to create a constant called Google Auth Provider and set that equal to new Google Auth Provider. Then I'm going to create a constant called login button, and I'm just going to grab the button from the HTML which had the class name of login. Then I'm going to set up an event listener on the button and listen to a click event, and inside of my callback function I'm going to call sign in with pop-up, and this takes in two arguments. The first is auth and the second is the Google Auth Provider. Now sign in with pop-up is asynchronous, so it returns a promise, so I'm going to tack onto it a .then method, and I'm just going to log out the auth to the console. Then if I save it and open up my browser, I'll be able to sign in with Google, and it is just that simple. But here's the issue. Aside from this console log, we can't really tell if we actually logged in, and if we click the button again, it will just go ahead and sign us in again, which is an issue that we don't want to deal with. So inside of VS Code, I'm going to create another constant for my logout button, and then I'm going to create an event listener for whenever the logout button has been clicked. Inside of the event listener, I'm going to call logout, and it takes in one argument, which is auth, exactly like sign in with pop-up. Now it doesn't need to take a second argument, it's just going to log us out, but it is asynchronous, so we're going to tack on a .then method, and we're just going to console.log logged out. Now once we log in or log out, the state will still not change in the application, so what we need to do is call onAuth state changed, and the second argument is a callback function, and we're just going to check if there is a user. What we want to do is remove the show class from our login button and add it to the logout button. Now if they are not logged in, then we want to do the exact opposite, and we want to change the visibility of the logout button when they log out. Now over inside of my browser, it should show me that I am logged out, and whenever I log out, it will ask me to log back in. Now that we've built our login in and out system, we can now focus on the database side of things and the to-dos. So I'll just navigate to my Firebase dashboard and go to Firestore database. And what we want to do is create our own database and start it off in test mode. Now the difference between production mode and test mode is test mode will allow us to read and write everything to the database directly from the client side, whereas production mode requires us to set up security rules so that nobody could gain access to the database just by sending out requests to Firebase. We're not going to cover security rules in this video, so we're just going to start it off on test mode and select next. Now it's just going to ask us for a region, and the closest region to me is in Europe and not in the US, so I'm going to go ahead and select enable. Now this process can take a bit of time, so I'm just going to take another coffee break. Now that our database has been set up, you would see I will get a few options here, such as rules, indexes, and usage, which we're not going to cover in this video. We're just going to stay in the data tab. As you can see, it says start a collection, and that's because Firestore is a NoSQL database. If you are unfamiliar with what NoSQL is, it is a database kind of like MongoDB, and I do have a 2-minute short video on this channel explaining how MongoDB works. And Firestore is essentially a lot like MongoDB, where we can have collections, and each collection can have multiple documents, and each document would have key value pairs. So I'm going to go ahead and create a collection, and I'll just call this collection to-dos. Now once I hit next, it is going to ask me to either provide my document with a unique ID, or I could generate a unique ID for it. Now each document would have key value pairs, so I could go ahead and give this document a field of content and set the value of it to whatever I want. Now once I hit save, you would see I would have a collection of to-dos, and this collection would have a document, and this document would have a field with the value of whatever I want set into the content field. Now we want to go ahead and perform the exact same operations that we've just done in the Firebase console, but this time inside of our JavaScript. So inside of VS Code, I'm going to import Firestore, and what I'm going to get from Firestore is get Firestore. Now get Firestore does the exact same thing as get auth. It is a function that allows us to connect Firestore by taking in the Firebase credentials. Then I'm also going to get setDoc, and setDoc allows us to create documents inside of our database. I'm also going to get a function called doc, and this allows us to reference documents inside of our database. And also I'm going to get a function called collection, which allows us to reference collections in our database. And last but not least, I'm going to grab onSnapshot, and this allows us to listen to changes in our Firestore database in real time. So if I decide to listen to my to-dos collection, any documents that have been added or deleted, it will be updated in real time inside of the front end of our web application. Now, to make things a little complex, but not too complex, I only want users to be able to add documents if they are signed in. If they are not signed in, then they cannot add documents. It doesn't matter who you are, anybody could add a document as long as they are signed into our application. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a constant to grab the section from our HTML document. Then I'm going to scroll all the way down and add a comment to indicate that this is my Firestore section. Now, I would recommend adding all the authentication code in its own file and the Firestore code in its own file. However, just to simplify everything, I'm going to keep it in the same file, and I'm just going to start off by creating a constant called db. Now, db will be equal to get Firestore, and Firestore will take in my Firebase credentials. Next, I'm going to create a constant called callRef, which stands for my collection reference. Now note, if this collection does not exist, the collection function will go ahead and create it for me. Next, I'm going to create a submit event, and its callback function will be asynchronous, and I'm also going to prevent the default behavior of the browser, as whenever you submit a form, the page would automatically refresh. Then I'm going to create a constant called docRef to reference the document, and I'm going to set that equal to my doc function and pass in the collection reference. Now, once I've referenced the document inside of Firestore, I'm just going to create an if statement and just check if the user is currently logged in. And if so, then I want to create the document by typing in await setDoc. SetDoc is a function that will take in the document reference, and once it is called, a document will be created in the database. But SetDoc also takes in a second argument, and that is the document that you want to create, and I'm just going to take the input value from my form as the value of the to-do content field. Now at this point, all we have to do is create the constant for form and the constant for the input, and I'm just going to go ahead and create them before any errors get thrown. Now I'm also going to create another constant called h3, and I'm going to reference the h3 tag that I've mentioned earlier in the beginning of the video, where we are going to show any errors if the user is not signed in. So inside of the else statement, I'm just going to set the h3's text content to please log in. Now at this point, our to-do app would be working and we'd be successfully adding documents into our database. Now there's one thing we still need to do, and that is to listen to documents in real time. Now onSnapshot listens to the database in real time, and it takes in two arguments. The first is the collection that you want to listen to, and that will be the collection reference. And the second argument is what we want to do once the collection is updated. And what we want to do is to be able to display all the documents inside of that collection. So now inside of my callback function, I'm going to set the inner HTML for the section to an empty string. Now that our section is empty, we can now loop through all the documents. So I'm going to take my collection and I'm going to run the for each method on it, and for every document I want the section's inner HTML to contain a div tag, and inside of that div tag I want a p tag. Now inside of the p tag I'm going to call my document, and I want to get the data from the document. And the way to get the data from the document is by calling a method on doc called data. This will return an object in the shape of the document. So I want to get the to-do content field from my document, so I'll call .toDoContent. Now if I go ahead and save it and check it inside of my browser, I'll be able to add documents inside of Firestore. And if I log out, I will get the error. However, if I log back in and try to add a document, the error will not go, and therefore I'm just going to scroll up to the authentication section, and inside of my if statement I'm going to set the inner HTML for the h3 tag to an empty string. Now whenever I add a document, it will get added. When I log out, I will get the error, and when I log back in, the error will go. Now that our application is working, what is left to do is to deploy it, and the first problem you're going to find is that this application needs to be bundled. So inside of my command line, I'm just going to exit the server, and I'm going to run npm run build. Then I will get this directory, and this directory is the folder that we will need to deploy to Firebase. So next I'm going to run npm install Firebase tools, with the flag G command to install it globally on my machine. Now npm might say you have vulnerabilities in your code like I do, so I'm just going to run npm audit fix as suggested, and my packages will be updated. From there I will run Firebase login to log into Firebase from my terminal, and since I'm already logged in, I'll run Firebase init to initiate my Firebase project. It will ask me, do I want to proceed? The answer to that is yes, and I will click my arrow buttons to move down to hosting and use the spacebar to select the option I want to choose from. And then it's going to ask me which directory do I want to use for my static folders. And the directory I want to use is my dist folder. So I will just type in dist and hit enter. Next it is going to ask if I want to rewrite URLs, and the answer to that is no, despite the fact that I'm not using any kind of links inside of this application. Do I want to set up automatic builds to GitHub? And that is no. And I don't want to overwrite my 404 HTML file, and I definitely don't want to overwrite my index.html file. From there, all I have to do now is run Firebase deploy, and once deployed I will get a URL. And once I click on the link, you will see my website is now live on Firebase. Now if you pay attention, you would notice that all these to-dos are in no particular order, and also whenever I refresh the page or add a new to-do, I will be reading every single document inside of a collection, which is bad because Firebase charges us for every single document read. So you might be wondering, how do we implement pagination and sort our documents in Firestore? How do we add security rules and analytics? Well, those are all topics for future videos. And if you enjoyed this video and want to see more content, please make sure to leave a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And on that bombshell, thanks for watching.